The Ghosts of Hiraeth, Heath. Written by Barry Dominic Graham. Narrated by Peter Baker. Theme music composed and performed by Barry Dominic Graham. This book is profoundly dedicated to my beloved wife, Helen Frances Graham, my son, Jonathan Christopher James, and to my beautiful daughter, Hannah Helena Margaret, also to all those others I love, and to those I have loved and lost. Crowley Manor House stands baleful and aloof amid the bleak, undulating landscape of Hiraeth Heath. The unimaginable ancient secrets and horrors held and buried within its archaic walls will eventually be uncovered, revealed, and ultimately released. Note: Hiraeth is a Welsh word for which there is no direct English translation. It is generally defined as homesickness, tinged with grief or sadness over the lost or departed. It is a mix of longing, yearning, nostalgia, wistfulness, or an earnest desire for that which may no longer exist. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. Edgar Allan Poe, American writer, editor, and literary critic, 1809 to 1849. Chapter 1. Another year's glistening alabaster snowscape had finally deliquesced, leaving Hiraeth Heath once again a relatively stark and bleak landscape, eagerly aching for the first true kiss of spring. Nevertheless, random patches of common cow-wheat wildflowers hung like buttercream droplets amid the tawny virescent tableau. Back in the city, Vincent Redford, after a usual restless and disturbed sleep, awoke to yet another depressing rainy vista as he gazed through his irregular bedroom window at the leaden, sunless sky. "There has to be more to my life than this," he soliloquized. Ostensibly, he perceived his hitherto existence as a doleful promontory, bestrewn with broken dreams, lost horizons, pseudo-people, and empty promises. Vincent was a very handsome young man of average height, stocky build, and flaxen hair. He was a struggling artist and poet who had been forced to accept whatever work opportunities came along in order to make ends meet. He had always been a searcher and seeker of truth, and despite the myriad of trials in his life and seemingly endless betrayals by so-called family and friends, remained, although educatedly cynical, very much open-minded and perpetually affable. His mind was unencumbered and untarnished by the degree of intellectual narcissism which commonly results in myopic self-assurance and irrationally skeptical smug certainty pertaining to subjects of which very little or nothing at all is actually known, especially with regard to the supernatural, being that which mainstream science generally and arrogantly dismisses, rather than merely admit to its utter failure to correctly comprehend. Vincent clearly understood that the cerebrally humbling discoveries of quantum physics research would ultimately prove to be the key to all existence. Vincent was originally born Francis Stevenson on December the 7th, 1974. He was the illegitimate son of a young Catholic girl named Amelia Stevenson, whose parents had insisted that the baby be put up for adoption under a guaranteed threat of banishment and disownment. Unfortunately, Andrew and Marion Redford, the couple who ultimately adopted the infant, were essentially in disagreement. The couple already had 5 natural children of their own, 2 girls and 3 boys, and the adoption of an outsider did not sit well with Andrew, who had a somewhat irrationally bloated concept of his own particular bloodline. However, the adoption went ahead, and the boy was thereafter renamed Vincent Martin Redford. Although Vincent's adopted mother treated him as one of her own, his adopted father not only struggled to merely tolerate his presence, but was significantly harsher on him in comparison with his other children. Vincent had a troubled youth, primarily due to his feelings of insecurity and being fundamentally out with the family. Sadly, he would never feel genuinely loved or accepted by his adopted father, exacerbated by the outwardly projected illusions of his inclusion in an archetypal, tight-knit and secure, happy family. As the years passed, the veiled hypocrisy on several levels would ultimately prove to be untenable. Upon reaching 16 years of age, young Vincent left home to make his own way in the world by signing up as a steward in the Royal Navy, after completing his 10 weeks basic training at HMS Raleigh Naval Base in Cornwall. His father was only too happy to sign the consent form. It was during his 5 years of naval service that Vincent discovered his creative potential, which would inspire his future aspirations to one day become a full-time artist and poet. Life was never easy for Vincent, as the pageant of disappointments and shattered dreams was seemingly endless. He was also plagued by a persistent depressive disorder, otherwise known as dysthymia, which combined with his inherent insecurities and abandonment issues resulted in an extremely distressing and tormenting sleep disorder, defined by doctors as night terrors. Regardless, Vincent soldiered on from day to day, endeavoring to be positive and hopeful. Through it all, he managed to remain an ever kind and thoughtful person, always being deeply cognizant of his spiritual aspect. Despite whatever trials and tribulations he'd endured, Vincent had some warm and cherished moments of the beautiful countryside which had surrounded his home. The scenes of early life have much to do with the moulding of the imagination and the fashioning of the character, especially in poetic minds, who have their primary pleasures in sympathy and communication with nature. When we return to them once more, after an absence of many years, the sight of the little brook by the wood, the village church, the standing stones, and the well-known hills come upon us with extraordinary power, thrilling us with the most indescribable feelings, and waking the echoes of 1,000 memories. The influence of these scenes, however, is an unconscious one, and they enter into the structure of our thoughts in a way we do not naturally think of. For as words are the counters for thoughts, so the conceptions of the familiar hills and vales, the woods and streams, the sacred fanes and the moss-grown ruins become in our minds the symbols of universal thought. However, if we arrest our thoughts and examine the conceptions as they pass before our mental sight, and ask where did we get those, we shall find that they are the conceptions of old and familiar things combined into new forms by the plastic power of imagination. It is thus, besides the sway they have over our feelings from early associations, that the scenes amid which we have lived intertwine themselves with our very being. Chapter 2. Despite being far from financial security, thanks to a substantial monetary bequest received upon the death of his adopted mother, in conjunction with his sporadic freelancing work, designing book covers and writing personalized poems for people, Vincent had been able to afford an adequately comfortable bedsit in the heart of the city, and a vehicle, a 2014 Toyota Avensis. It was Saturday morning. By 11 o'clock the rain had abated somewhat, inspiring Vincent to venture out for a stroll down to his local used bookstore. After stopping briefly to purchase a coffee, he continued on his journey along his usual route. A strange and unsettling feeling suddenly overwhelmed his senses, causing him to abruptly stop in his tracks. Slightly dazed and momentarily stunned, he agitatedly looked around him for some kind of explanation or source as to the cause of this disconcerting occurrence. Nothing appeared unusual or alarming. The street was busy with traffic and pedestrians as always. Bewildered and perturbed, Vincent located a nearby bench and sat down to collect his racing thoughts and gather his shaken wits. Convinced it was merely another panic attack, he sipped at his coffee and stared at the ground for several minutes, until being gripped by an abrupt compulsion to look up and across the road at a narrow side street he had puzzlingly hitherto never noticed before. Discarding the remainder of his beverage, he quickly arose, checked for approaching vehicles, and hurriedly made his way towards it. He felt the hair on the back of his neck begin to rise as he apprehensively and irresolutely approached the entrance to the gloomy and anomalous little street. Nevertheless, Vincent felt compelled to explore it. As he slowly and guardedly walked down the deserted cobbled lane, he spotted ahead of him on the right an old wooden sign swinging gently in the breeze. A baffling and enigmatic sweet fragrance filled the air. He instinctively knew, somehow, that this peculiar sight was his destination. Nearing the signage, he could then read, in decorative, time-worn vintage letters, the name Eternal Echoes, Curios, Oddities, and Antiques. The quaint little shop was Dickensian in appearance, due to its twin curved nightingale-brown frontage and thick crown-glass windows. Vincent anxiously and tentatively rested his hand briefly on the antiquated door-handle, while summoning the appropriate fortitude to enter. As he did so, a distorted sounding bell clanged almost ethereally upon the opening of the door. Cautiously entering, he could see a plethora of aberrant objects in every direction, from bedraggled, creepy dolls, obsolescent furniture and militaria, to faded artwork, disturbing taxidermy, and anomalous objets d'art. Without warning, a short, elderly man suddenly appeared, seemingly from nowhere. He wore a threadbare old woolen cardigan over an equally tatty washed-out shirt and bow tie, nondescript brown twilled trousers, odd-looking bespoke buttoned shoes, a tattered tweed cap, and green fingerless gloves. "Good day, young man. May I be of some assistance?" he said, in a pleasant, tranquil, almost whispered voice. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest," Vincent answered awkwardly. "Why not take your own time and have a look around, sir, and then perhaps something appealing will catch your eye," the old shopkeeper considerately replied. Vincent bemusedly accepted this advice and began erratically glancing about at the multitudinous serried objects. Once again, he felt his core being penetrated by a strange, disquieting feeling as he negotiated his way through the antediluvian farrago. He felt as though he was somehow being guided, and despite the vaguely melancholic and slightly macabre ambience, he was becoming increasingly enthralled. Within moments, his eyes were drawn to a large Menaceous painting which appeared to him as being almost incandescent, with beguiling vivid realism, in spite of its bizarre and eerie greenish hue. Depicted was the silhouetted rear view of an imposing mansion house, standing aloof amid a haphazard arc of leafless birch trees on an otherwise desolate and barren landscape. "That's Crowley Manor," informed the shopkeeper, as he casually approached the spot where Vincent was standing. "Ah, Crowley Manor. I see. An unusual painting indeed," Vincent tentatively replied. "Yes, indeed. It most certainly is that," the shopkeeper enthusiastically agreed. "Crowley Manor is a 17th or 18th century abandoned building which stands on a rather barren and, may I say, God-forsaken, uncultivated expanse of land, curiously named Hiraeth Heath, fairly close to the North Devon coast. Hiraeth is a Welsh word, pronounced slightly different than it's spelled. As far as I'm aware, it loosely means to yearn for or miss something. Regardless, as I understand from the stories I've heard over the years, it is a place steeped in very dark and disturbing lore, with reference to unsavoury things that are said to have occurred there." "Do you know what kind of things?" Vincent asked curiously. "Well, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you, sir. Some kind of occult practices involving what most people would categorize as black magic, I believe," he answered. "Really? That's peculiarly fascinating," said Vincent, whilst rubbing his chin in contemplation. "How much are you asking for this painting?" he inquired gingerly. "Well, as you can see, the unusually thick and heavy water-gilded baroque frame is rather valuable in and of itself, being very possibly of greater value than the painting it surrounds," stated the shopkeeper. "Thus the price," he said, pausing for a moment. "You may have it for a mere 75 guineas. "Ah, all right. How much is a guinea in pounds?" Vincent replied worriedly. The shopkeeper smiled kindly. "Let's just call it £75 even. The difference is trifling," he graciously replied. Vincent briefly hesitated as he studied the painting once again. "Do you happen to know anything about the artist?" he asked. "Not much is known of the artist, I regret to say. Nothing, in fact. Somewhat of a mystery is our M.L.H. "M.L.H.?" queried Vincent. "Yes, indeed. A faint initialed signature is just visible in the bottom right-hand corner, if you look closely here." "Ah, yes, I see it now," confirmed Vincent, looking closer. "OK, let's do it." "Thank you," he declared. "An excellent decision, if I may say so, young sir," concurred the shopkeeper. "If you could do me the kindness of conveying it over to the counter for me, I'd be much obliged. I'm not as strong as I once was, I'm afraid." Vincent reached up and firmly grasped the painting's huge frame. Expecting it to be of significant weight, he was none the less shocked at just how heavy this item actually was. Once lifting it off the wall down to a manageable height, Vincent was then able to carry the painting over to the cash register counter without overly excessive strain or effort. "Much appreciated, sir," the old shopkeeper said gratefully, as he proceeded to wrap the painting in thick brown paper, prior to securing it with strong fibre twine, in such a way that a carrying handle was ultimately created by incorporating a section of soft cloth. "That's excellent," proclaimed Vincent, thoroughly impressed. With the transaction and pleasantries now completed, just as Vincent was leaving, the shopkeeper called after him, saying, "I imagine, sir, that there should be some archival or local information to be gleaned somewhere in the North Devon area regarding Crowley Manor and its history. Should that be of further interest to you?" "Yes, thanks. That's a good point," answered Vincent in agreement. "Well, thank you again for everything. All the very best to you." "All the very best to you, young sir. Enjoy the rest of your day," said the shopkeeper, smiling warmly. Vincent smiled back as he exited, the strange bell ringing once again when he opened the door. Feeling surprisingly serene, he paused for a second and had a final look at the old shop's exterior before embarking on his short journey home. Chapter 3. Upon reaching the end of the lane, just before re-entering the main thoroughfare, he again stopped to look back down the little side street at the shop, which now appeared to nebulously evanesce, even though the weather was otherwise now reasonably sunny and clear. It didn't take too long for Vincent to return home. He immediately laid his parcel on the bed, fetched a pair of scissors to cut the string, then proceeded to gently remove its thick brown paper wrapping. Still a little perplexed as to exactly why he felt so motivated to buy such an incongruous article, he carefully hung it above the mantelpiece of his long, redundant fireplace, prior to intently scrutinizing the curiously gauche and ultimately disconsolate image portrayed. The picture he'd replaced it with was infinitely more cheerful and inspiring. After about 10 minutes or so, suddenly feeling quite nauseous and drained of all energy, Vincent decided to lie down and hopefully sleep for a short while. No sooner had he closed his eyes when there was an almighty crash, violently jumping up with shock and fright, simultaneously blurting out colourful expletives. He frantically scanned the room. The painting had somehow fallen, still leaving the hooks firmly embedded in the wall, and the frame's hanging wire still securely fixed and intact. The noise had been amplified due to the heavy frame colliding with his decorative pewter fireside toolset, and by smashing into his prized porcelain Buddha statue. Bewildered as to the cause, Vincent strenuously picked up the painting. As he did so, he immediately noticed that a curious rear panel had come loose, and was now separating from the rest of the frame. Concealed behind it was ensconced an antiquated black leather-bound journal, and a huge decorative brass key. The book measured approximately 6 inches in width, 8 inches in height, and about 3/4 of an inch thick, with goatskin parchment pages. The cover was reinforced by decorative metal, with the front being embellished with a pentacle medallion securely affixed to its centre. The brass key was at least 10 inches long and cumbrously weighty. An ominous feeling of malevolence seemed to emanate from them both. After removing the items, Vincent carefully replaced the panel, ensuring it was secure, prior to meticulously rehanging the painting. Simultaneously fascinated and perturbed, he carefully examined the exterior of the book before opening it. To Vincent, at least, the entire contents were written in some unrecognizable and indecipherable language or cipher. He sat on the edge of his bed, thoroughly perplexed, and solemnly pondered his next move. Chapter 4. Following yet another restless night of irregular sleep, Vincent nevertheless awoke remarkably refreshed. His resolve to pursue the essence of the mystery, which he'd been so unexpectedly confronted with, had galvanized him into positive intent and action. Several hours of intensive internet research eventually yielded results. Vincent discovered examples of the exact same text used in the old book. It was called Sumero-Akkadian cuneiform. The next logical step was to locate an expert in such matters, preferably one being based somewhere in the southwest of England. Surprisingly, it wasn't too long before an appropriate candidate was found, who actually resided near the North Devon coast, in the village of Chillingholt. Professor Nigel Barrington Chalmers was cited as being a retired professor of Assyriology, who was an expert in Babylonian and Sumerian history and languages. A further search revealed a contact number for him. Slightly solicitous about calling, Vincent nevertheless expeditiously dialed the acquired digits. The phone rang out for a minute or so, before being answered by a firm but friendly masculine voice. "Hello, the Barrington Chalmers residence?" "Ah, yes, good morning. May I please speak with Professor Barrington Chalmers?" requested Vincent. "This is he. Who's speaking, please?" the professor inquired. "My name is Vincent Redford, Professor, and I was hoping you may be able to assist me with the translation of a text, which appears to be, as I understand, written entirely in Sumerian cuneiform." "Oh, right. Well, then, I don't see why not. I'm currently afflicted by an abundance of free time at present, thanks to some unfortunate health issues of late," he answered dispiritedly. "I'm sorry you've been ill, but thank you, Professor. I'm extremely grateful to you indeed," he gushed relievedly. "It would be my pleasure to be of assistance to you, Mr. Redford," assured the professor. "I'm relatively housebound at the moment, so if you can meet me here in my home, I can be at your service whenever is most suitable for you." "I believe you're in North Devon, Professor?" Vincent queried. "Yes, that's correct. The village of Chillingholt, to be precise," he affirmed. "Starfire Cottage, adjacent to old St. Drausnius Church on Clovelly Lane." "Excellent. I'll book accommodation somewhere local, get packed and so on, leave in an hour or so, which means I should be with you around 7ish this evening, if that's convenient for you, Professor." "Certainly, of course," he genially endorsed. "By the way, I recommend that you stay at the Black Swan Inn on Market Street. They've almost certainly got vacancies." "I'll call them directly, Professor. Much appreciated once again," Vincent gratefully replied. "Goodbye for now." "See you this evening, then. Adieu for now," confirmed the professor. "Have a safe journey." Vincent duly arranged his stay at the Black Swan, and then promptly packed up everything necessary for the trip, proceeding to fervently set off on the mysterious adventure which lay ahead. He felt filled with an odd sense of purpose. Having driven for almost 3 hours, a sign for Chillingholt eventually appeared, partially obscured by the lush countryside foliage of spring. "Thank God for sat-nav," he muttered to himself. It was apparently a small and presumably historic location, if the solitary, decaying, weather-worn iron sign was to be judged. A deluge of rain soon accompanied the dusk of eventide as Vincent entered a quaint little hamlet. The Black Swan Inn was extremely charming and appropriately anachronistic. Vincent was forthwith and cordially shown to his room by a very polite and elegant elderly lady. Suitably refreshed and sated following his ablutions and a light repast, Vincent phoned the professor to say he was on his way. Armed with his vintage briefcase, he left the inn. It didn't take long thereafter to arrive at his ultimate destination. The porch light of Starfire Cottage was on, and as Vincent excitedly exited his vehicle, the professor came fleetly into view. Standing with an outstretched hand and a welcoming smile, the professor cordially greeted Vincent, graciously ushering him into his home. Professor Barrington Chalmers was a tall, lean, well-dressed gentleman in his early 60s, with a distinguished greying beard and grey, brill-creamed hair. He was immaculately groomed. "Welcome to Chillingholt, Mr. Redford," he said. "You had a pleasant journey, I trust." Yes, indeed, Professor. Thank you so much for inviting me," Vincent gratefully replied. Upon being shown into a beautifully cluttered and cosy sitting room, with 2 nubuck leather couches and a gently burning open log fire, hospitality was promptly offered. "You have a lovely home, Professor," remarked Vincent. "Well, thanks. That's very kind of you to say," replied the professor, obviously delighted by the compliment. "Please, make yourself comfortable." Whilst taking a seat, Vincent briskly opened his briefcase, removing the artifacts discovered within the painting's frame. "So, Professor, these 2 items were hidden behind a rear panel of the frame which surrounds an old painting I recently purchased. The journal I already spoke with you about, but it was also accompanied by this impressive-looking key," explained Vincent. Indeed. A fascinating find, to be true," observed the professor, undeniably captivated. After examining them closely, the professor took the journal over to his desk and proceeded to set about the task of translating the lone passage on the first page of text. "You are absolutely correct, Mr. Redford. The language written here is indeed Sumerian cuneiform, without a doubt," he confirmed, without hesitation. About 15 minutes passed in silence. Let's see now. The text on the first page basically translates as, "He who gives of his seed to Moloch incurs no punishment, unless he delivers it to Moloch and causes it to pass through the fire. If he gave it to Moloch but did not cause it to pass through the fire, or the reverse, he incurs no penalty, unless he does both." "Does that make any sense to you, Professor?" Vincent asked bewilderedly. "In fact it does," replied the Professor confidently. "I recognize it from the Babylonian Talmud. Tractate Sanhedrin 64a, I believe. I have a copy of the 1961 Sonsino edition over there in my library." "It's completely beyond me, I'm afraid," sighed Vincent. "Unfortunately, it'll take some time to translate the rest of the text, so would you mind if I kept the journal overnight, and I'll print it out for you tomorrow?" requested the Professor. "Certainly, of course. Your time and effort is truly appreciated, more than I can say, Professor. Honestly," declared Vincent gratefully. "Would tomorrow afternoon around 3 p.m. be suitable for you, Mr. Redford?" the Professor asked. "That'd be fine. I'll see you then. Oh, and please call me Vincent." "Perfect. Then you must call me Nigel." "Well, Vincent, I'll see you tomorrow then. Sleep well," he said, while walking to the door. "I'd just as soon call you Professor, if you don't mind, that is. It feels more comfortable for me, as well as being more appropriate," Vincent earnestly replied. "Whatever suits you best, Vincent," the Professor chuckled, both flattered and amused at such a rare example of respect. Chapter 5. Vincent endured a further harrying night of restless sleep. After partaking of an extremely hearty breakfast at the inn, he then zestfully explored the little village. It was a beautiful spring morning. It didn't take very long. The old churchyard proved to be the most interesting place by far, being enhanced by an enchanting spectral haze which surrounded many beautiful cherry-blossom trees in full bloom. Vincent had always gained a certain melancholic pleasure from wandering around historic sites, such as castles, graveyards, and megalithic fanes. Eventually overcome by weariness, he returned to the Black Swan for a nap before his designated meeting with the Professor. Having slept for almost 2 hours, Vincent violently awoke, choking, feeling like he couldn't swallow. He had no idea where he was or even who he was. Horribly familiar, terrifying symptoms of derealization and depersonalization were now accelerating with every labored breath he took. Gripped by literally indescribable sensations of disembodied, identity-less consciousness, in a nightmarish fog, unable to distinguish between reality and dream state, he stumbled to his room window and leaned out, struggling to take deep breaths as his heart thumped and raced. Despite the frequency of such episodes he'd endured over the years, they always seemed to morph and intensify with each event, in order that the maximum degree of fear would be inflicted and maintained each time. It typically took about an hour for normality to be restored. Once fully recovered, Vincent showered and shaved prior to departing for his rendezvous with the Professor. Upon arriving back at Starfire Cottage once again, the Professor was outside waiting to greet him. He looked wearisome and troubled. "Well, Vincent, I barely know where to start," he somberly declared as they shook hands. "I spent quite a night translating that text of yours, both fascinating and inordinately distressing, to say the least." "Oh, dear Professor, I do apologize for that," replied Vincent worriedly. Vincent was expeditiously led to the Professor's study. His capacious pollard oak desk was strewn with various documents and open books. "Please take a seat," invited the professor, as he dexterously pulled an antique Gainsborough chair to the front of his desk. "It's probably best that I just read my approximate translation to you, and then later explain any aspects you may find perplexing." "Yes, absolutely, Professor, thank you," agreed Vincent gratefully. "All right, then. Here we go." The professor sighed apprehensively. "Whomever is destined to find this journal and decipher its contents may, I pray, use it to help me redeem my damned and accursed soul. My name is Sir Edward Arthur Crowley. I am born of perceived nobility. My bloodline is primordial in origin, and regarded superior by many, Atlantean Anunnaki to be precise. To my eternal shame, I have indulged in and performed rituals which are modern expressions of those practiced by the ancient Atlanteans, Babylonians, Sumerians, Phoenicians, Hittites, Canaanites, Egyptians, and Akkadians. There has been a continuous and consistent procession throughout history of the same rituals to the same deities. These deities and entities are of course not human, they are interdimensional. They influence humanity from the lower soul matrix dimensional realms, and have been known by various names such as archons, jinn, demons, and demiurge. Many children and some adults, whom society would never miss, were offered up in ritual sacrifice to those beings in exchange for our material enhancement, power, and wealth. These entities feed on the fear-based vibrational energy created through various forms of ritualized trauma, torture, and murder. Myself and other participants harvested a powerful, rejuvenating, psychotropic elixir called neuromelanin from the pineal gland through the eyes of our terrified victims prior to their death. The younger the sacrifice, the greater the potency. We ultimately ate their flesh and drank their blood. The adrenalized blood was consumed from golden goblets in a mixture which was created by using the extracted pineal and pituitary glands, gracefully stirred with jewel-encrusted ceremonial daggers. Our supply of victims was ultimately curtailed by plague. As a result, chaos soon followed. The ultimate withdrawal process from our elixir vitae caused my followers and myself to suffer rapid aging and infirmity. Our entire physical existence embodied narcissistic delusion, avarice, and pretension. The earth had begun its vibrational ascent towards cosmic harmony and oneness. In reality, our gods were anything but. Like us, they were, and are, merely parasites. The souls of our victims are dimensionally trapped by a false ascension matrix, and ostensibly being held captive as an energy source in a cavern beneath Crowley Manor. They are constantly and closely guarded by an infernal sentinel. The manor is built upon an energy vortex where once stood earlier structures. The Heathland area was formerly the site of ancient pagan sacrificial rituals and mass burials. I beg that the ordained finder of this journal use the key to the secret door and discover a way to free them. The door is hidden behind an oak panel in the northwest corner of the basement wine cellar. I am now dying. I can only pray that creation and all those poor souls may find it possible to forgive us. Well, that's the closest translation I can provide you with, Vincent, the professor said, sighing deeply once again. There followed a brief, contemplative moment of silence. Wow, that's definitely not what I expected to hear, Professor, Vincent replied, with a slight tremble in his voice. No, I'm sure it isn't. It certainly wasn't what I expected either, answered the professor. In light of these revelations, Vincent, what do you intend to do?" "I really don't see what choice I have," he whimpered. "I couldn't rest if I didn't at least try to do something, even if all of this is merely nonsense and someone's sick idea of a joke." "I fully understand your feelings, Vincent." The professor sympathized, subtly nodding his head. "As it's only an hour or so drive from here, the only next step I can see is to simply go to Crowley Manor and find out what the truth actually is. What are your thoughts on it, Vincent?" "Well, absolutely, Professor. Though what about your health issues?" questioned Vincent concernedly. "Oh, please relax. They're barely relevant at a time such as this. Don't be concerned," he insisted. "It's almost 4 o'clock. If we leave now, or at least as soon as I've gathered up some essentials, which will include a particular book which may be very useful should all of this actually be true, then we should arrive with at least 3 hours of daylight remaining." Vincent reflected for a moment. "Fine then, Professor. Let's just do it," he proclaimed determinedly. Within 20 minutes, they were prepared to leave. "Do you mind if we take my vehicle, Vincent, as it may be better suited to the terrain than your own?" the professor suggested. "No, not at all," replied Vincent, quietly grateful. The professor opened up his garage to reveal a practically new metallic green Land Rover Defender. "Geez," Vincent exclaimed, "that's quite a machine you've got there." "Yes, indeed, thank you. Unfortunately, I haven't had much cause to drive it recently." "Well, you certainly have a good one now, it would seem, Professor," retorted Vincent jocularly, trying hard to disguise his now increasing anxiety. "You did remember to bring the key, Vincent?" the professor asked, wryly smiling. "Absolutely," Vincent replied, nervously patting his right jacket pocket. "Excellent. Well, although I've never actually visited Hiraeth, Heath, I'm fairly certain I can get us there without using the sat-nav, for all the use it would be where we're going anyway," asserted the professor. He then started the engine, and they drove off. "As far as I know, Crowley Manor has been derelict for over 70 years, at least," disclosed the professor. "It's just as well you brought those flashlights then. In that case, they'll prove vital," Vincent declared, with growing apprehension. Chapter 6. The journey passed relatively quickly. The professor competently arrived at Hiraeth Heath in spite of the lonely labyrinthine country roads which led there. He pulled over to the side of the road. "Okay, well, now need to check the map book in the glove compartment in order to pinpoint the exact location of Crowley Manor," he announced. Vincent promptly retrieved it. The professor flicked through the book until finding the appropriate page. Let's see now. As far as I'm aware, there's a circle of Neolithic standing stones not too far from the manor house, which I would imagine should be clearly visible," he said, whilst carefully studying the map. Here it is. It actually doesn't look too far from where we are now." They drove on for several more miles before abruptly stopping. "Over there, Vincent. Can you see the stones?" "Yes, Professor, absolutely," Vincent replied. A neglected gravel road was quickly located thereafter. The sky was now beginning to bruise as threatening storm clouds gathered overhead. As they travelled along the knurled and noisy road with its stones and gravel violently crunching beneath the tyres, a downpour of rain suddenly cascaded from the murky heavens. Within minutes, it was torrential. Upon approaching the stone circle, just as Crowley Manor came balefully into view in the distance, Vincent could swear he saw the image of a man momentarily appear, standing next to one of the stones. Shocked and stunned, he quickly realized unbelievably it was the old shopkeeper from the antique store. An oppressive, augural feeling now consumed him. They completed their journey in strained silence. As they drove over the ever-increasing alluvium into the glistening, wet, overgrown forecourt of the derelict edifice, they simultaneously took a sharp intake of breath. "Looks like we made it," declared the professor ironically. "Definitely," Vincent nervously replied, repeatedly clenching his jaw. They stared apprehensively at the lowering, ruined structure which loomed menacingly before them. Trepidatiously exiting their vehicle, they contiguously retrieved their respective paraphernalia from the back seat. Lightning began to flash and thunder roared as the wind wuthered violently around them. Gelid, pouring rain instantly drenched them. "Wish we'd thought of raincoats," quipped the professor humorously as they ran through the turbulent squall, heads down, towards the malefic main entrance door. "Let's hope this thing isn't locked," Vincent yelled above the cacophony of the tempest. Upon reaching the door, they transiently hesitated before reticently attempting to enter. Fortunately, the door was indeed unlocked. With significant effort, they both pushed it open. Incredibly, once again, Vincent thought he saw the old shopkeeper's image briefly appear, only this time standing by the foot of the formerly majestic but now nightmarishly direful main staircase. Shaken and now filled with perturbation, Vincent frantically rubbed his eyes, becoming ever more convinced of his suspected deteriorating sanity. "I don't think I can do this, Professor," he groaned. "Completely understandable. I'm feeling rather ambivalent right now myself, but I know instinctively that none of this is coincidence. We would never forgive ourselves if we didn't at least try to pursue this mission to its ultimate conclusion," he earnestly predicated. "I know, Professor. I know you're right. Vincent uneasily acquiesced. As they cautiously entered into the colliginous sinister vestibule, stepping warily onto its ancient wet flagstones, the initial zephyr of malodorous musty air was almost too unbearable to endure. Heavy raindrops fell frequently from the various ceiling cracks and collapsed corroding areas, dripping delicately down the crumbling, once vibrantly decorated walls. A colony of startled atramentous bats frenziedly flew out of the open door. The flashlights were quickly utilized, due to the Cimmerian shade of the tenebrous interior being black as pitch, as a result of the large first-floor windows having been boarded up. It wasn't difficult to imagine crazed skeletal spectres shrieking dementedly whilst violently bursting out from the shadows. "All right then, Vincent. Let's focus. We first need to find the cellar door," the professor affirmed, before proceeding to lead the way. "Absolutely, Professor. Right behind you," Vincent diffidently replied. Chapter 7. Making their way carefully through the detritus, which had fallen and gradually gathered from various areas of the disintegrating mansion, Vincent yet again saw a fleeting image of the old shopkeeper, this time pointing to a large oak door. Still keeping his visions to himself, Vincent announced that he had a strong feeling, though inexplicable, that this particular door was very possibly the one which led to the cellar. Suddenly, a horrendous, ear-splitting, guttural roar bellowed throughout the building as a briefly blinding flare of fiery light radiated from the left-hand side of the vestibule. As their eyes adjusted, they could see a huge, bizarrely baroque mirror, with its frame seemingly partially aflame. To their abject horror, a monstrous demonic face then appeared, glowering furiously within it, growling and snarling ferociously. "Oh, my fucking fuck!" squealed Vincent hysterically. They both stood aghast and trembling at this devastatingly appalling sight. What do we do?" screamed Vincent frantically as he started to gag with fright. "Calm yourself, Vincent, calm yourself, please," begged the professor stoically, despite being equally terrified. Quickly! We must get to the cellar door, now!" he vehemently exclaimed. Still being cognizant of the damp and dangerous fallen debris, they sped to the door that they hoped would convey them to the cellar. As they reached it, all but the storm fell silent. They both heaved an audible sigh of relief. Now that reality had come crashing mercilessly down upon them, it was clear that they must now choose whether to submit and retreat or not. Successfully navigating the time-worn descending steps, they soon found themselves standing in a creepy, capacious cellar, as dark as Erebus. "We can't allow our fears to destroy our resolve, Vincent," demanded the Professor. "This may very well be the single most crucial event of our entire lives." Agreed. I'll be okay. Honestly," Vincent staunchly assured him. They both now felt light-headed and decidedly nauseous. "So we're heading for the northwest corner," determined the Professor pragmatically. Vincent shined his flashlight onto the Professor as he groped in the front compartment of his backpack until extracting a compass. He then promptly ascertained the accurate direction. "Okay, this way, Vincent, and stay close." "Don't worry, Professor. I'll practically be sitting on your shoulders," Vincent replied facetiously. Barely being possible, the cellar seemed to get even blacker as they progressed. Upon approaching the array of empty built-in limestone wine racks in the northwest corner, the Professor examined his compass once again, only to see it going haywire. "This is definitely the northwest corner, Vincent, but the compass is going crazy." "Hell's teeth, Professor, what now? There's no door here I can see." "The journal's text said it was hidden behind an oak panel. We need to focus the flashlights and search the walls." Sure enough, they duly located a wooden panel, almost totally obscured by a dusty, torn and mouldy canvas sheet. "Eureka!" the Professor vociferated triumphantly. "Terrific," mumbled Vincent. They brusquely removed the cumbersome mangy veil. Now faced with the task of uncovering the secret door, they both paused for thought. "We'll need to find something to prise this panel off, Vincent," assessed the Professor. "Look around the floor for a lever of some sort we can use." They searched around for an appropriate tool. A low but continuous guttural growl could now be clearly heard. Freezing in their tracks, they stared anxiously at each other. The terror they had felt when witnessing the surreal, hell-born horror in the vestibule mirror, which they'd almost managed to temporarily suppress, now returned with a vengeance, as the thunderstorm raged even more savagely without. "Don't acknowledge it, Vincent," instructed the Professor forcefully. "The only true weapon that thing possesses is our fear of it." No sooner than his words were uttered, the growling ceased. "Just concentrate on finding what we're looking for, Vincent." "Yes, I'm looking, Professor," he replied sheepishly, shivering and shaking with shattered nerves. "Ha!" the Professor exclaimed upon spotting a likely device. "This old section of anchor plate should suffice nicely." Vincent worked his fingers behind the heavy panel and strenuously pulled it as the Professor gradually wrenched out its nails from the stone beneath. It took about 20 minutes to finally remove it. Then, after laying the ponderous panel aside, they stepped back and shined their flashlights on the now revealed secret door. Gazing agog at the hefty bog oak door, the Professor fascinatedly observed the aged mosaic above it. "If I'm not mistaken, that's the Lion of Babylon depicted there," he remarked with ephemeral alacrity. "Anyway, I think we'll be needing that key now, Vincent." "It would seem so, Professor," Vincent resolutely replied, sanguinely reaching into his jacket pocket. "Please do the honors, Vincent," the Professor solemnly requested. Reticently stepping forward, Vincent placed the key into the lock, strenuously turning it with breathless angst. As he did so, the Professor took the special book he'd brought out of his backpack, then, rapidly opened it at the relevant place, once correctly positioning and securing his flashlight through one of his jacket epaulettes. Vincent took a deep breath before arduously pulling open the heavy door. Immediately as he did so, the storm outside completely and inexplicably subsided. A putrid stench of mephitic stagnant sulphurous air instantly overwhelmed them. They may have omitted to bring proper masks, but luckily they were both carrying handkerchiefs, which they now sagaciously adapted for the requisite purpose. Their flashlights effectively illuminated strangely incandescent carved stone steps and walls of a passageway descending down into a sinister subterranean cavern. A powerful sense of hermetic malevolence pervaded the atmosphere. Hereupon, the professor spontaneously began reading aloud from his book an ancient Sumerian exorcism ritual devised to dispel Thonian presences. Of Ea are they, of Damkina are they, of Enkur Signuma Ubara are they, of Inkur Signuma Ubara are they, of Adapa, the ruler of Eridu, are they. I am the sorcerer priest of Ea. I am the messenger of Marduk, to revive the sick man. The great Lord Ea hath sent me. He hath added his pure spell to mine. He hath added his pure voice to mine. He hath added his pure spittle to mine. He hath added his pure prayer to mine. Whether thou art an evil spirit, or an evil demon, or an evil ghost, or an evil devil, or an evil god, or an evil fiend, be thou removed from before me. By heaven, be thou exorcised. By earth, be thou exorcised. May the pestilence, fever, pain, sorcery, and all evil be removed from the body of the wanderer. Unto my body may they not come nigh. May they get hence from near me. May they not follow after me. By the divine gods, may they be exorcised. May he not be held in bondage. May his fetters be loosened. Get thee hence. By heaven, be thou exorcised. By earth, be thou exorcised. A diabolical roar reverberated throughout the entire building as its structure began to violently shake, shudder, and quake. A gargantuan discarnate form of the devilish countenance which had appeared in the vestibule mirror then savagely charged, screeching frenziedly towards them. An unearthly powerful blast of electrified air rushed through both men, throwing them backwards. At that moment, the professor clasped his chest in obvious pain, then fell to the ground. "Vincent, quickly! Get the book and keep reading the text," he gasped beseechingly. Vincent hastily lifted the book, found the text, and resumed the ritual. "I am the sorcerer priest of Ea. I am the magician of Eridu. The threshold unto the house on entering, Shamash is before me. Sin is behind me. Negal is at my right hand. Ninib is at my left hand. When I draw near unto the sick man, when I lay my hand on the head of the sick man, may a kindly spirit, a kindly guardian stand at my side. Whether thou art an evil spirit, or an evil demon, or an evil ghost, or an evil devil, or an evil god, or an evil fiend, or sickness, or death, or phantom of night, or wraith of night, or fever, or evil pestilence, be thou removed from before me. Out of the house go forth. For I am the sorcerer priest of Ea. It is I who recite the incantation for the sick man. Whether thou be an evil spirit, or an evil demon, or an evil ghost, or an evil devil, or an evil god, or an evil fiend, or sickness, or death, or phantom of night, or wraith of night, or disease, or evil pestilence, be thou removed from before me. By heaven, be thou exorcised. By earth, be thou exorcised. Unto the man, the son of his divine God, come not nigh, get thee hence. By heaven, be thou exorcised. By earth, be thou exorcised. Demon, be thou exorcised. An incredible tranquility and improbable peacefulness suddenly fell, permeating every aspect of the scene. It was over. Somehow the ritual had succeeded in actually dispelling the demonic subjugator, and apparently cleansed the manor of its resident evil entirely. Thunderstruck, Vincent staggered over to where the professor now lay silent and motionless. There, falling to his knees with bittersweet relief, despair, and spiritual exhaustion. It was distressingly obvious that the professor was dead, and that attempting any form of resuscitation would prove futile. No, Professor. Please, no. You can't be dead. You just can't. Dear God, why? Why? Cried Vincent pitifully. The same strange feeling which he'd experienced prior to discovering the little idiosyncratic antique store now engulfed him once again. Wiping his eyes, he became aware that the formerly pitch-black cellar was subtly becoming steadily and undefinably brighter. Vincent was astonished to observe that coruscating flecks, like twinkling beads of starlight, were surrounding both he and the professor. In a sudden flash of shimmering and resplendent golden light, now stood the old shopkeeper, smiling gleefully. He was the quintessence of divinity. "Follow me, Vincent," he said softly. Mesmerized and bemused, Vincent compliantly acquiesced to his request. The old shopkeeper proceeded to slowly descend the cavern passageway steps, followed tentatively by Vincent. The interior of the arcane primeval chamber was aglow with an Elysian opalescence. It was difficult to believe that this place had formerly been a heinous, hellish sanctum of debauchery, torture, terror, and murder, being some kind of warped dimension of fluid space. As Vincent stood spellbound at the cavern omphalos, mid a swirling lilac haze, the whole interior became wondrously filled with lustrous flying orbs of prismatic dancing light, just prior to billowing up in an undulating luminous cavalcade through the chamber passageway, leading to long-awaited emancipation. Swiftly following them as they exited the cavern, Vincent then marveled with reverence at the sight before him. The old shopkeeper hovered within a golden nimbus beside the lifeless body of the professor, as the Linga Sharira orbs gently gathered over it, forming a tender celestial aura of ethereal incandescence. In but mere moments, the professor's limbs, languidly, began to move. As he slowly and disorientedly sat upright, the orbs delicately arose and ascended once more into the air, before soaring forth in an angelic argent procession, departing Crowley Manor forever. All the formerly captive souls were now free. The old shopkeeper looked proudly at Vincent, smiling sagely as he also gracefully faded from sight. "Thank God, Professor! Thank God you're all right!" Vincent heartily exclaimed as he helped him to his feet. "I do feel mighty queersome, but otherwise quite wonderful. I would suggest it's about time that we retire from this particular venue, don't you, Vincent, my friend?" jovially proposed the professor. "I thought you'd never ask," Vincent blithely agreed. This has been The Ghosts of Hiraeth Heath, written by Barry Dominic Graham, narrated by Peter Baker. Copyright 2020 by Barry Dominic Graham. Production copyright 2020 by Barry Dominic Graham.